Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I want to welcome you for our extraordinary IMCO meeting. I'm very happy that the room is again a little bit fuller after 2 years of pandemic and interactio and connection problems. I think it's great that we have again a lot of people in the room today, especially because we have such two important agenda items, both related to the landmark legislations, to the two pieces of legislation that are basically still undergoing but almost finished, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. So if there's no objection, the agenda is adopted. I have, as usual, some short chair's announcements. There's different languages available for interpretation. Unfortunately, not Danish, looking at our Danish colleague who will speak soon. But anyhow, your English is perfect. I know that. So the meeting will also be web streamed. And let me remind you again, we have a new newsletter on our IMCO website. It's always very valuable looking at it and to see what kind of important files we as IMCO committee are working on. So with that, we directly move to agenda item 3, where we will have, I would say, again, a report back, but a more detailed, thorough report back on what happened exactly in the last trilogues. We know that all of those trilogues happen in the night. We, of course, try to inform everyone on Twitter and be as transparent as possible. But, of course, we wanted to also give a little bit more room to show in our committee on what we worked on so intensively in the last 1.5 years and what are actually the results that the European Parliament achieved for the EU citizens, but also, of course, for the EU businesses, for the online world. So with that, I would like to give the floor to our two rapporteurs of these files. To give them a little bit the stage and debrief us what has been achieved in these two important legislations. We start with Andreas Schwab from the EPP, our rapporteur on the Digital Markets Act. Please, Andreas.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let me just say that I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be the first to speak here. But I would just like to say that we are able to sit together today and discuss two pieces of legislation. And if that's possible, then it's to the credit of all of us. And so I'd like to thank everybody for the support and the faith you've placed in me. And I'd like to thank the staff for their commitment to the task.
To have a bit broader outlook about the results, and it's true that the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, which has been done by my colleague Christel Schaldemose, have a very strong interplay, and it's also about a political assessment. And we have to acknowledge that also the French presidency has helped a lot by speeding up the process and by looking without any too difficult procedures for compromises. And most important, we have Frances Haugen with us today. And we have met her already in the procedure, and I think it has been a very helpful contribution, because on whatever we have been discussing here, and I have experienced that also in the aftermath of these negotiations, there is always a sort, especially in the area of the Digital Markets Act, of blackmailing situation, because companies that suffer for market failure or for dominance of specific companies, they are just scared to speak out. And therefore, it has been helpful, extremely helpful, that our parliament has made hearings, but also that some people like Ms. Hogan have been having the courage to speak out on specific tools that we as parliamentarians were not always aware of in detail. And therefore, it's great that we take the time today to exchange. And I would like to report to you quickly about the trialogue outcomes, about the most important ones. The Digital Markets Act, to a certain expectation, is unfortunately backward-looking because it takes stock of all the competition policy procedures that we have been seeing that have taken too much time. And what we wanted to do, and some colleagues have been pushing for that a lot, we wanted to make it more future-proof and more future-oriented. And for that reason, we have been introducing some key provisions that haven't been foreseen and that are not part of that backward-looking experience that are to a certain extent just changing the burden of proof to already past procedures that the European Commission has done in competition policy against these big companies, the big tech companies. So I would like to make very clear, first of all, the procedural and enforcement elements are extremely important for long-term results. First, I think this Parliament has made clear that gatekeepers have less options to cheat. Although in algorithms, normal citizens have no inside view, it's not anymore possible to have delaying tactics in the designation procedures or in the regulatory dialogue. That will create openness. And even further in Article 5 and 6, and my colleagues have been spending an awful lot of time in looking into the details of it, we have also been trying to create as much as openness as possible without destroying the innovation effect of these companies in the digital market. And in addition, we have been making sure that the Commission gets stronger sanctioning tools. In case of systematic non-compliance, the Parliament made it easier to apply structural or behavioral measures, and we have introduced also a temporary merger ban. In relation to the scope, Chairwoman, colleagues, I think we have been discussing a lot, but procedurally, probably the most important is that with the intermediary services, we have an open door for whatever the market will show, and that will make this law more efficient than people have thought at the beginning. Now, also because of the hearing that we had with Ms. Haugen some months ago, the Parliament significantly strengthened the obligations, also with regards to companies like Facebook in the aftermath of the scandal on Cambridge Analytica. Because the data combination, for which colleagues have really been fighting hard, we have avoided that data combination will continue to be used in between core platform services. That you are a good company and that you have a strong service, that's fine. And that you can use the data that you create and that you get there, it's fine as well. But if as a gatekeeper you want to switch these data to other services that might be much less performant, that will not be possible anymore. Or it will only be possible if the consumer and the user, and that's the people that we care most about here, give their consent. I think there are plenty of elements that I could now dwell on. I think some of them we will touch on in the exchange later. I would like to mention the interoperability element that we have been introducing. Also here, some colleagues have been fighting very hard. It's true that it's an imperfect situation because the interoperability obligation only is there for companies that come up with a reasonable request and want to connect with gatekeeper services. So we are not yet in a full interoperable system, but it's a first step to make more contestability of markets where there is already a strong dominance. And we have done the same with some specific solutions like choice screens, default settings, and uninstallation give to users a greater choice. And all this together will allow markets to grow. And then I would like to come to the final point in that list, Chairwoman, and this is the fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory approach. Obviously, this is a new concept in this law because it has been applied in some other areas so far. But from our point of view, the front principles are there for everyone, for sure for app stores, but also for other players, because fairness and reasonable and non-discriminatory conditions is a general principle in the European Union, and therefore we expect gatekeepers in the area of app stores, social media, and search to respect also this. And all this together has been only possible, I mentioned it already, Chairwoman, because this strong support in this committee and of other committees in the House. And therefore I would like to conclude that while the DMA draft was backward-looking, the Parliament has taken a view of the future and ensured that the text will be now future-proof. For sure, there is a lot of work for the Commission to be done, and we will also remain grateful during the whole process if people like Frances Haugen will testimony and will give us insights on what can be done better, because obviously there is still a lot to be improved, and that's what this Parliament wants to work on. And that's for, I think, all the work that we have done was useful, and we are looking now to the future in the digital markets area, and there are other areas to be covered soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas Schwab, for this report back. I think you did a tremendous job in finding a parliament position, I think strengthening the European Commission proposal, as you said, for example, with this forward-looking element, but also, of course, in defending the parliament's negotiation positions in the trilogues. And I guess with this file and also with the second file we just will talk about, I think we as European Union show also, especially in the light of these worldwide crises that we are able to deliver, and I think that is quite important. So with that, we go to the second legislation, the Digital Services Act, where we also equally will hear our rapporteur, Christel Schaldemose, for a report back and a summary of what happened and what was the outcome.
Thank you so much. And also from my side, I would like to thank also our committee to give us a chance to go more into depth about the impact, not the impact, on the result of our negotiations. And I think it has been really a very important two pieces of legislation we have been making here. And it would not have been possible without the very good help from our staff and from the shadows, etc. So I think that we can be proud of the process as well. And also the speed, I have to say, that when I, in the beginning of the process, said, well, I think that we should try to finalize the DSA during the French presidency, many said to me, do you think that's possible? But luckily it was. And before I go into the content, I also have to say that I would like to thank the State Secretary, Cedric O, as well. He's with us online. And when I saw him, I wrote to him that I kind of missed our conversations, even though they were sometimes very difficult. But we really spent some time together to try to find solutions. But I think that every one of us can be proud of the result. And later on, we will also talk about more of the global consequences when we have this the next point 4. But there is, in my opinion, no doubt about the impact of the DSA. It will be global as well. But what did we do? First and foremost, I think that it is maybe good to remember people that we received the Commission's proposal in December 2020. And after that, we tabled here in the Parliament more than 3,000 amendments. And many, many committees were involved, both with a classical opinion, but also associated committees. So we really, really made a good job, even though it was sometimes also complicated. I have always defended the quality over speed, but I think that what we have achieved here showed us that it was possible both to make a good quality legislation, at the same time do it very, very fast. I also think that we, with this result, sends a clear signal to the tech industry. What is illegal offline should also be illegal online. And if you're not taking your responsibility to ensure a safer online environment, then you will be sanctioned. And I think this is a very clear and very important message. So what did we do? Well, we built upon the e-commerce directive, which we adopted back in 2000. And we are maintaining some of the core principles from the e-commerce directive, including the no general monitoring obligation and the country of origin principle. So nothing in the DSA will oblige platforms to do active fact-finding or make a general monitoring of the content of their interfaces. But, and also the free movement of services across the EU will be guaranteed because it's still the applicable law of the member state in which the service is established that will apply. So this is important to send that signal. But we also did more, and we said that we will keep the principle of limited liability for the platforms. However, we also made things that they have to comply with, and if they don't comply, then they will, of course, become liable. That's the way we did it. So, in general, I think that we made a good list of rules that will make a better that will ensure better choices for users of platforms. No matter whether you're a citizen or you're a consumer or you're a business user, you will get more choices. We also try to protect consumers by banning dark patterns. We have made a ban on online targeted advertising based on profiling of minors, as well as a ban on targeted advertising based on profiling using sensitive data. I think this is important. This is the first step to stop the platforms from misusing our data. So I think this is a very important achievement. And on that, I would also like to thank Andreas and the team on the DMA, because we made these two things together in the two legislative proposals. So in addition to this, we also agreed to have greater transparency for online advertisement in general. For instance, by permanent and harmonized marking of advertisement, including from influencers. So they will be a part of this legislation as well. And we have also ensured, and everything is important, but this is very dear to me. We also ensured stronger protection of minors, for instance, by obliging the online platforms' accessibility to minors to put in place measures to ensure a high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors. I think this is important. And also, we have made rules about the greater transparency requirements for recommender systems, as well as rules on also more transparency and transparency for the terms and conditions. And thirdly, we are also introducing new and stronger rules for online marketplaces. With the DSA agreement, we have introduced specific rules for online marketplaces. We have strengthened the traceability of traders, as well as putting in an obligation for random checks to ensure that consumers can safely buy services and products that are complying with EU law. So enforcement and sanctions are not always efficient. And therefore, we also thought that it could be useful to give the consumers or the users of platforms even more chances to make sure that they had some rights they could enforce. So we also introduce a right for compensation for any user who has suffered a damage due to non-respect of the due diligence obligations. This is a way also, as an addition to protecting citizens from illegal content and products, as well as from negative impacts on algorithms to ensure, I hope, better algorithm accountability. I will keep on because the time is running, and I will try to not go into many details. But I also think that it's very important to mention that we ensure that European SMEs, they will not face disproportionate obligations. This has also been a very important topic for the Parliament. We will try to make sure that we can help them innovate and grow. And therefore, we have introduced a grace period for medium-sized enterprises. So if they have been small and become medium-sized, then they will have a period of 12 months before they have to comply with the new rules. I think this is a very good help for companies in order to make sure that they will have time to understand the new rules. And finally, or not finally, but we also managed to ensure stronger obligations for very large online platforms. And this is really something new. We made new rules to make sure that we have algorithm accountability. We're trying to open up the black box of algorithms. And we do it by demanding the platforms, the very large ones, to make on a yearly basis an assessment on how their algorithms affect the users and society. We want them to look into the effects of the algorithms, for instance, on hate speech or cyber violence, but also on revenge porn and cyberbullying and things like that. So we are really trying to ask them to open up, and in case they don't, and in case they find problems, they have to risk mitigate. This is also a very important thing that hopefully can help us making a more trustworthy environment online. They should also assess negative effects on misleading or deceptive content, such as disinformation. And if they find any risk, they have to adopt measures to mitigate the risk identified. So with this, I think that we really can see a more safe online. I hope so. And in addition to this, we had a very lengthy debate on it as well, but we also introduced a crisis mechanism, allowing the Commission to act upon a recommendation on the board of national digital service coordinators to require very large online platforms and also very large online search engines to apply specific measures if there is a specific threat to public health or public security in case of an extraordinary situation, like a war or like a pandemic or maybe a natural catastrophe. So we also asked the platforms to make independent audits, and we also have made sure that we give access to data and algorithms to the Commission and to the digital service coordinators of establishment, and vetted researchers and vetted non-for-profit organizations and associations should also be able to get access to data and algorithms if, of course, they fulfill certain obligations. But I think this is also part of opening up the black box of algorithms, and I think that will really help us making sure that we know that this legislation will be enforced. And coming to enforcement, on the very large online platforms, we decided that the Commission should have the power for the supervision of very large online platforms and search engines, like in the DMA. And I think this makes sense. And in order to make sure that they have resources to make this supervision and enforcing the rules in a good manner, we also decided to make sure that there will be a supervisory fee that the platforms have to pay, so that we're sure that there are enough money. And if a platform is not complying with the rules, finally they might be getting sanctioned with a fine of maximum 6% of their annual turnover worldwide. I could speak for many more minutes. I will not do that, but the list, as you can hear, is long. And what we have tried to achieve is both looking at the user side, all the different users, and the society side, and also the company side, that we want to make sure that we have a level playing field, that we protect consumers, that we protect our democracy. And I do think that we can, all of us, be extremely proud of this result. It will have an impact, not just in Europe, but globally in the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you also to you, Christel Schaldemose, very much our rapporteur, who had the difficult task not only integrating the different views of political groups, but I think also that shows our democracy is very strong, because we had different ideas, we had heated debates, but we came to a good result. But also integrating all the other committees that made such an important contribution, I think, to our IMCO work. And as you said, the list of achievements is quite long, but I think we will probably also discuss in our second agenda item today a little bit longer, also with the other members present here. Now I would like to give the floor to the French, now I have to say, I guess, former French Minister of State for Digital Transition and Electronic Communications, Cédric O, because we wanted to give both co-legislators today here the opportunity to speak. I think it is really important that we had basically a negotiation partner that, of course, defended also his line from the Council, but also was open to arguments, which also achieved at the end a quick and swift result in both files. So, dear Cédric O, I give you the floor now, and you're connected online, I guess. Yes.
Oui, bonjour, Madame la Présidente, chère.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. Rapporteur, Christel, Andreas. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak today on the major successes for Europe of the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act. You're quite right. I ceased to be a minister 2 days ago. I can come back to that, but I have an opportunity now to pass the ball on to you to take this further. Now, regarding the two texts under discussion, before addressing the substance, repeating what Christel and Andreas had said, I'd like to welcome the form of the text and how things proceeded. In general terms, I think it's very important for Europe that in less than 2 years altogether, we were able, as far as digital regulation is concerned, to table texts of historical importance, debate them and amend them, and I trust, in all logic, to adopt them in the next few weeks. I welcome the animated spirit that informed your work with Andreas and Christel Schaldemose. in their work respectively as rapporteurs on DSA and DMA. I'd like to thank both rapporteurs, of course, as well as Ms. Verstegen, the Vice President of the Commission, Commissioner Breton, but also all the members of the ITRE committee and the rapporteurs in the other committees, as well as yourself, Anna, since you played an important role in ensuring that we were able to keep the pace up. And I was very upbeat about the atmosphere that informed our work. This means that we have these two new texts tabled now, the Digital Service Act and Digital Market Act, as far as I'm concerned. Having spent 5 years serving France in Europe in this area, I think are the most important texts. I think they are absolutely crucial. Now, I won't return to the very specific points mentioned by Andreas and Christel in their presentations regarding the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act. I think the content is very full now, and it's going to be hard for us to gauge the real impact of the legislation until a number of years have gone by. Given how rich they are and the wealth of subjects they address, we will need a number of years in order to assess what will really have changed, taken as a whole. I'll start with the Digital Market Act. I think this is important in completely resetting the way the digital economies work. The question of antitrust measures and fighting the concentration of the market are global concerns within the new economy. You can see this reflected in the legislation adopted in South Korea, or the current debate in the United States, as well as other countries. I think there's a global consensus regarding the need to adapt the rules governing the way we regulate the market along the lines mentioned by Andreas, tailoring this on the real world where essential structures are regulated, but we need to match that now to the digital market. If you draw an analogy with bridges and airports, I'm sure no one would imagine that just their private owners could regulate them properly. You can't have people who run a motorway just deciding off their own bats what the fee to charge. I mean, that is just inconceivable, and the same applies very much to the way we regulate the digital market. Given the inherent concentration on the digital market, given the platforms, the search engines and so on, it's vital to ensure that there is proper public scrutiny of the course of events. And I think the Digital Market Act will definitely do that. I feel convinced of that. It marks not just economic progress, but democratic progress. If you look at the history of antitrust legislation, follow it back to the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, you'll see Luc Leys and the others who envisaged American antitrust legislation at the time looked at Standard Oil and the railways as requiring democratic scrutiny. It wasn't just an economic imperative. I think this will create an earthquake. It's absolutely vital. As for the Digital Services Act, as you know, that addresses the issue of liability, or at least the regulation of content. Everyone has mentioned the point that reaching an agreement on this topic of the DSA in 6 months was something that you could take even less for granted than the Digital Market Act, given cultural specificities of the various countries of Europe. And I really do welcome the fact that we managed to achieve this with the two co-legislators, together with the Commission, all hauling in the same direction. As you were saying earlier on, Madam Chair, I'm going to miss my discussions with the co-rapporteurs and everyone in the future. Now, there are two major principles written into the DSA which I think are absolutely vital. If you look at the terrible killing in Buffalo the other day, I think it's absolutely vital we can make progress on these issues. So the first principle is transparency. The opaque workings of the platforms at the moment, given the role they play in our democracies and the way they provide guidance or channel public debate, mean that we have to bring that opacity to an end. We need to know how content is governed. Why does certain content get onto the platform and not others? If you're looking at Facebook or Twitter, we see this opacity as an aberration for democracy. So, for the regulators, but also researchers, there has to be access to the information. That's vital for democracy in the years to come. And the second vital principle is responsibility or liability. Now, without encroaching on the e-commerce directive, I think it speaks for itself that if you wield great power, you also have to shoulder great responsibility. The major platforms are not doing what they should to reduce risks and must be held responsible for their failure to apply resources to this issue. That's crucial. The implementation of the DSA in the months and years to come will significantly change people's day-to-day experience when it comes to disinformation and cyber bullying suffered by our fellow citizens. The new approach on regulating the market mentioned by Crystal Schaltermoser just now is essential. There's a feeling of urgency when you have dangerous products being sold on certain platforms today. You can see that crying need. So at the end of the day, we have two texts here, strong interlinkage regarding the infrastructure and the content. You couldn't have one without the other. We have a body of European law here, which will be bolstered in the future by further legislation, crucial piece of legislation that set out a European course of action in the digital sphere. All this will have to be implemented, however. I know that's something that's close to the heart of the European Parliament as a whole and the two rapporteurs. It's going to be a struggle. The timing for implementation is ambitious, but I think these two texts, and once again I'd like to thank everyone involved. Europe is turning a new page in the regulation of the internet.
Merci beaucoup. Indeed, we had very tough negotiations with the Council going on also in late night hours, but at the end I think it was a very cooperative approach. I want to thank you very much again and wish you all the best for the future in your new job or whatever might come. I want to also use the occasion and thank the Commission. We will not have Vice President Vestager or Commissioner Breton here today, but of course they were present at all the trilogues and were always together with their staff acting as an honest broker, supporting the two co-legislators. So with that, I also want to thank the Commission. So now, dear colleagues, we move to the second agenda item for today, where we will in fact now discuss the impact, and especially also the global impact of these two landmark legislations. And for that, we have a guest here. I welcome also on the podium Frances Haugen. Thank you for being here again with us. I think your speech in, when was it, November here in this committee, in this House, gave a lot of inspiration to the lawmakers and also pushed, I think, our ideas on also tackling the business models of the platforms and not only looking at the surface, but also looking at the algorithms and, of course, also looking at targeted advertisements. So very happy that you are here. You know that we will do a mission with this committee to Silicon Valley to also exactly discuss the questions, what is the impact then on other states, on, for example, the United States or other states in the world, of the DSA and the DMA. And of course, we are also very interested in hearing your opinion on the outcome that we just listened to from our two rapporteurs and from the State Minister. I welcome you very much again. I would like to give you the floor, but of course also welcome the Commission representatives, because at the end we will also hear from the Commission. And dear colleagues, you can already prepare. Now we will also have the time to discuss from all the shadows, rapporteurs, all the political groups, the outcome again, of course, and also the question of the global impact of this legislation. So welcome very much. I give you the floor.
Thank you. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, so I definitely need water. 1 second. Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd like to start with a heartfelt congratulations on reaching a political agreement on the Digital Services Act, a landmark agreement that will make social media less toxic for users. The Digital Services Act is the most significant piece of social media legislation in history. It goes to the heart of what I've tried to do as a whistleblower who worked inside of Facebook: make social media far better without impinging on freedom of speech. In Europe, we will now be able to see a modern alternative to the current whack-a-mole approach to content moderation that results in endless discussions on which particular piece of content should stay up or must go down. Instead, the DSA focused on the oversight of the design and implementation of systems rather than determining what is good or bad speech. One of the core reasons that I came forward was that Facebook's current strategy of focusing only on content moderation, of only allowing the public to participate in the question of how to regulate social media, the focus on content moderation, was a strategy that didn't work in a linguistically diverse world. Facebook is very different than other industries with similar amounts of power. If we were talking about an oil company or a car company, we would have the ability to inspect the products of those companies. We could buy a car and we could crash it. We could put sensors on the car and see, does it actually pollute the way it claims to? If children were being harmed near an oil derrick, we wouldn't have to take the word of the oil company that, oh, no, it's the clouds that did it, not our smoke, or it's not us, or the pollutants. We could go check ourselves. Facebook is different because we only ever see our screens. All of the choices that impact us, all the trade-offs happen somewhere mysteriously far away. And up until now, Facebook has taken advantage of that secrecy to operate in a very different way. That they've only given us a tiny little slice of the conversation. They framed it for us and said, this is what we're allowed to talk about. The reason why the DSA is so important and this focus on systems is so important is that when we build safer products, we get safer products for the entire world, no matter what language we speak. I was in Denmark maybe 2 days ago. No, yesterday. I was there yesterday morning. Sorry, the world is, it's very fast. There's only maybe 7 million Danish speakers. Do people not deserve to be safe because, there's 6 million, even fewer. There's 6 million Danish speakers. There's more than Norwegians, and I was in Norway just a couple months before that. But Norwegians and Danes deserve to be safe too, just because they speak smaller languages. And this focus on systems really shows that Europeans are used to living in a linguistically diverse democracy, and you understand the value of those cultures and the diversity. And we need to show tech companies that they need to design in ways where everyone is safe no matter what language they speak. This is the right way forward, and it can be a model for other countries around the world. The DSA will be the first instrument that creates a holistic set of obligations for tech companies, which will force them to properly assess and mitigate the harms of their products that they can cause. Tech moves incredibly fast and will only continue to move faster. Focusing on responsibilities and obligations is a way to be more future-proof by focusing on risk assessments and on process instead of pointing out just specific features that we want changed. This means for the first time, digital service providers will have incentives to put people over profit when they're facing a choice between profit-maximizing strategies or the public interest. Employees inside the companies will feel supported to do the right thing when assessing potential risks of product design choices. We have the backs of the people who have strong consciences inside of Facebook. We're giving them the space to do the right thing. This sounds revolutionary, but it is standard practice in other areas of our economies. Global companies had chosen profit-maximizing strategies at the expense of the public interest before. We've seen it with pollution in the chemical industry, environmental damage in the natural resource extraction economy, and predatory mortgages and financial services. What distinguishes the bad practices of these other industries from big tech is simple. There are laws holding them accountable. That's what government is intended to do in democratic capitalism. Use the law to steer the market back into alignment with the public interest. When concentrated monopolistic power privileges the few over the many and distorts how the free market operates, this kind of correction is vital. This is not about protectionism. This is about protecting the interests of citizens all over the world. These rules are like the systems in the United States that compel pharmaceutical companies to keep drugs safe and to allow the Food and Drug Administration to independently verify the results. Most people aren't aware of them, but we're all glad that they're there. As an algorithmic specialist and data scientist, I'm most excited by the DSA's new requirements for access to data for researchers, auditors, and regulators. This will allow independent research into the impact of social media products on public health and welfare. For example, Facebook, Instagram, and others will have to open up the black box of which pages, posts, and videos get the most likes and shares, shining light on the outcomes of the algorithms. This will allow thousands more people, not just those who work at these companies, to address the complex problems of how information markets change social outcomes. No longer will we depend on taking the company's word for it when they say they're trying to fix a safety problem. Democratic and investor accountability and oversight of big companies boils down to whether we can accurately diagnose the problems their products are causing, devise solutions, and verify that the industry is actually following through with them. The era of just trust us is over. Hence, I am pleased to see that some of the most innovative parts of the DSA are actively being discussed in the United States, with both parties increasingly cooperating to understand the joint challenges and potential solutions to improve transparency of content moderation, algorithmic amplification, and data access for researchers. Monday's statement from the EU and the US Trade and Technology Council between the EU and the US is encouraging as it promises more alignment on these topics, in particular by advancing data access for researchers in the United States. Europe has laid out a path that we can adapt in our uniquely American way and learn from. Finally, I want to end with a strong call on all of you and your respective governments to put your money where your mouth is. The law cannot remain a dead letter. Strong enforcement is absolutely critical to achieve meaningful and positive changes. We are living in difficult economic times with rising inflation, the war in Ukraine, and the still ongoing COVID-19 crisis, all having significant budgetary impacts. But we need significant resources to make the DSA a success story. This will require investments to train auditors and regulators. It requires resources to build new data analysis infrastructures. It requires resources to attract people with the right profiles. The EU has a unique chance to get this right, and I wish you all the courage to make the right decisions in order to make it a success. Thank you so much for putting so much hard work into this. I know it was hard, but it's going to change. It's going to change history. It was really important, and I'm so grateful for everything you guys have done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again for all the work you have done. I think we as policymakers also rely on people like you who have the courage to speak up when they see problems. And I think, yeah, this was also basically your contribution. I think that we ended up at the legislation how it is now. So thank you for that. We have now actually a round of colleagues who want to contribute and also probably also potentially ask questions to you. And at the end, you will have the chance to reply again. We start with our DSA shadow for the EPP, Ava Kokolari.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and hello, Frances. Welcome to the European Parliament. I want to thank you for coming here and giving us very important insights. I especially want to thank you for being here in the autumn when we had the hearing, when we were legislating. And I'm one of the negotiators for the Digital Services Act. I represented the biggest group in European Parliament. And I must say, I think most of us think that the internet in generally has improved our life so much better in general. And it will continue to revolutionize the world. But I think we also can agree that in order to have a free and open internet, we need to have a safe and trustable internet. So I think finally the Digital Services Act is sending a clear signal that we want to have a safer internet with clear rules for everybody, with consumer protection and a more business-friendly environment. And I think this has been welcomed from many stakeholders, and we've done our best to really make a good, proper legislation that I think hopefully can also be as a role model for other countries to follow. So I see that in the United States, the legislators there are looking into the Digital Services Act and what we have done here, and I really hope that that could be the guiding principles also for the U.S. to have an open space digitally with strong safety and user-friendly way, and to make sure that we really tackle what is illegal online more properly that we have done right now. So from my perspective, I want to thank you for your contribution. It's been very important for us, and I really hope that this will benefit all citizens in Europe, all businesses in Europe, and hopefully to create a standard globally on how to make the internet more free and safe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aba. Now our DSA Rapporteur, Christel Schaldemose for the S&D.
Thank you very much, and dear Frances, thank you so much for coming here today, but also in November. I think that without your visit to EU or even your whistleblowing, your testimonies, I don't think that we would have had such a strong and good DSA as we delivered. I think that you have been really important in that role. You have been inspiring us, but also you became the point of reference when we discussed, well, you said, and suddenly we had a common conversation about the problems. As Andreas said, it can be difficult for us to know in details how companies work and how things are when we make legislation, but it became more visible and more understandable for us. And I do truly believe that you have played a very important part of this, so thank you so much. Next week we are going to San Francisco, and we're going to discuss and talk with stakeholders on this landmark legislation. And I hope certainly that we will inspire United States. I think that we are setting the global standards on how to regulate the online environment and social media. And especially, as you said, on the algorithms, I think we're doing something really new, and that will have a huge impact. But my question to you is, what could your advice be to us going to the United States? What could we say? What do you think is important? What could be the way to make them also understand that this is not a burden? It is something that we're doing to create a trustworthy environment that makes people wanting to go online, everyone, and not just a few. So what could we do? I would be happy to hear something, but thank you very much for your role in this as well.
Thank you, Christel. So we do a collection. So now I give the floor for Renew to Dita Sharantsova, our Shadow Rapporteur for Renew.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Frances. It's really a pleasure to see you again in the Parliament. And I'm happy that after such a short time we see you again, that we can say we delivered. First time when we met, we discussed the risks that you saw, that many citizens actually wanted us to fix. And now I'm happy to see that we have managed to do so. The biggest question for me is the implementation. Because we can have wonderful laws, we can have wonderful wording, but the most important is the implementation. The fact how our national government, how the Commission will get it right to get the providers to really start doing something and avoid the last resort which we put into the legislation. How to push them that in advance they start taking measures. And that would be, for instance, my goal of the visit in the US, to really push, especially the big ones, to start thinking what they must do. I think the sooner they accept, better. I also think what is crystal clear, that we make sure that no tech giants are above the law, that there are no digital islands, and that everybody in this big system from Apple, Google, Meta has to really react, take more responsibility and act. I would also add that this is just the first step. It has been already said by Cedric. I think what we are actually doing now in Europe is, I would say, the opening of the floodgates. We have already a number of other legislation on the table, AI, cybersecurity, Data Act, among others. We keep hearing from the telecoms that they want to overturn the net neutrality principle, for instance. So there are so many that is happening currently in Europe. For me, as a liberal person, I would say that we can see the end of less fair internet and that we will see more and more regulation. And I'm a bit concerned that we have to get it right, to find the right balance between what is actually needed in this fast-growing environment on one hand, and on the other hand, how not to kill the innovation. So thank you very much. Again, keep an eye on our forthcoming legislation and hope to see you again here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dita. Now for the Greens, Alexandra Gese, who was also the Green Shadow Rapporteur for the DSA.
Yes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Frances. Good to see you again. I would like to outline what your contribution was. In Europe, we had the initial proposal on the table, and we had some ambitious ideas on how to improve it. But without you, we wouldn't have had the proof for our criticism, because the narrative in Europe was that Facebook and eventually Google were being manipulated by external actors. But you brought the proof that it's really the mechanisms, the business model, the algorithms themselves that are the problem. And that really turned the narrative. And without you, we wouldn't have achieved a political majority for our more ambitious goals. So what did we achieve? What is this landmark legislation? I would like to quote Shoshana Zuboff, who is a Harvard Emeritus Professor of Economics, and she's the author of Surveillance Capitalism, which is a little bit the theoretic background of what we are discussing here. And she said about the DSA, DMA, that it is the first comprehensive declaration of a digital future, founded on the legitimate authority of democratic rights and the rule of law, and a signal that the principles of a self-governing demos might survive the digital century. And I would like to say it's a signal that a self-governing demos can thrive in the digital century. So what we really did here in Europe is we turned the tide. We stopped that sense of inevitability that a handful of corporations would decide the rules on a global level, influencing public opinion through intransparent algorithms. For example, disseminating disinformation, shrinking the space for a free press through a duopolistic control of the advertising market, and threatening a free economy based on a combination of monopolistic power and data control. But what we did also achieve is we broke up the black box, because these companies, the very large online platforms, will be object to public scrutiny when they pose risks to fundamental rights and human dignity. And that means the DSA is also dynamic legislation, because we will be able to conduct research accessing the platform's data. And the more data, the more insights we gather, the better we will be able to regulate. So the DSA, DMA, for me, it's just the start, because it allows us to tell the stories of how they're influencing our world. And then we as society, we can decide how we want to live. So my question to you is, you said enforcement is crucial, and we know that. How can we support those researchers who will do this absolutely precious jobs to really analyze the details of how the platforms work, what are the harmful mechanisms, what are good mechanisms, the ones who are going to tell the stories? How can we support them in order to develop the regulation further if it is needed, and to have platforms that really enhance democracy? How can they team up how can the organizations who ask the right question on the protection of minors, for example, on the fight against disinformation, how can they team up with organizations that have large data analytics capabilities? What can our role be? What do they need? And what kind of advice would you give to the European Commission and to the national digital services coordinators who will be responsible for the oversight and who will need to build up an enormous expertise and have the chance to be a global center of expertise for platform regulation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now I have on my list the ID coordinator, Virginie Joron.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Haugen, for sharing your expertise with us. As one of the shadows on the DMA, I think this legislation is a step in the right direction. It could end the omnipotence of the big tech companies, but it could have been better. The Parliament's standards were brought down, and these non-compliance measures will come into force later. I think the thresholds for gatekeepers need to be introduced as quick as possible. What we've always wanted to do is protect European users, and we want to have a level playing field for our European companies in the digital arena. Thanks to the excellent negotiations led by Andreas Schwab, the damage to the initial European Parliament stance was lessened. So many of your proposals were taken on board, Ms. Haugen. Whistleblowers are protected, and the clauses on that are quite clear. And protecting whistleblowers will be very important, and it has been supported by the political groups, and it survived negotiations with the Council. As you know, Ms. Haugen, the big tech companies will do everything they can to hide everything that they're doing wrong. It's thanks to courageous people like you that the truth has come to light. We should support whistleblowers, not just by applauding them, but by ensuring that they have legal protection. Thank you very much.
We move on to our ECR shadow rapporteur for the DSA, Adam Bielan.
Thank you very much, Chair. The Chair, Ms. Haugen, ladies and gentlemen, in the context of rapidly evolving digital technologies and business models, but also new societal challenges, we faced the need to reshape the rights and obligations of digital markets and service providers, as well as internet users in the EU. I welcome the conclusion of the Digital Markets Act and thank Andreas, the French presidency, and commissioners for their hard work in closing this file. The DMA can be a step forward to making our companies more competitive globally, but this is predicated on SMEs in particular being able to maximize the opportunities created by the disruption introduced by the Act. New possibilities such as greater access to data or more players in the advertising market will bring benefits, but mostly to those SMEs with capacity and experience in digitizing their offers. Growing this capacity will be key. I have already written to the Commission on this regard and regret that the response showed complacency. Unfortunately, no additional support was envisaged by the Commission despite the huge changes that DMA will bring. I believe this approach will need to change, and I am sure that the Commission present here today will share my view that specific measures are necessary for European SMEs to be successful in global markets. Under the Digital Services Act, and I would like to congratulate Crystal on her achievement, we have achieved our goal. The online environment is now set to become much more transparent and safer for users. In parallel, my group sought first and foremost to guarantee freedom of expression online and rule out incentives for platforms to remove user content too hastily. We also managed to introduce better tools that will allow users to defend themselves against arbitrary decisions of internet giants. Users will finally be able to challenge moderators' decisions. All of these achievements not only defend fundamental rights online for Europeans, but also are on the right track to set the global benchmark for regulating online platforms in the future. In this context, I hope that the other jurisdictions in the world will learn from our experience and will take cautious steps with regards to services key to the online world, such as cloud services, search engines, so that open internet and freedom of expression are always granted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I take the left, I can let you know that we have probably 2 slots for Catch the Eye. So if you want to speak and Catch the Eye, let me know now. First come, first serve. But now first the floor to Anne-Sophie Pelletier from the left. Yes, I gave you already the floor, but sorry.
For the left.
For the left, yes.
Pardon, merci.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ms. Haugen, for being here again. I want to pay tribute to your courage and the extremely useful work that you've been engaged in. You, as whistleblowers, really help us when we draw up legislation on the major platforms. The DMA and the DSA could be more ambitious in our eyes. That's what the left in this Parliament thinks. We think it could help the European market and the world market. European legislation will force the platforms to comply with new obligations. Hopefully, our standards will apply to the rest of the world. We need to look at content moderation, though. You said last year that Facebook content moderation was not of a good standard for languages other than English. Under the DSA, we now have transparency mechanisms, and under the audits and the risk analysis, we will have a better idea of how content in the EU is moderated. 1. How does the US legislation look at content moderation? Do you think it could force Facebook to look at content moderation seriously at a worldwide level? I have a second question. Many NGOs, including consumer organizations, are in favor of the DSA, but they say it's not ambitious enough. My group wants to ban targeted advertising completely, outright, to stop profiling of citizens and consumers. We do have a ban of targeted advertising for children and advertising that's based on sensitive data such as health data. We think the bans could have been fuller, could have been better, but we've got somewhere. Can big tech be moderated without their business models, their basic business models really being affected? For you, what are the shortcomings in the legislation? What can be done to better regulate big tech companies? Thank you.
So now the 2 Catch the Eyes are Kim van Sparentek and Dietrich Kloon. And then we have the Commission, and then we would love to hear your answers. So Kim.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Ms. Haugen, for being here again. And good to see you here again. And thank you again for teaching us about the dangers of divisive interaction-based recommender algorithms and their impact on our society and democracy. I think the new Digital Services Act, which will regulate the internet, creates more transparency and will open up the black box. But of course, the next step is always taking action. So what would you say are the alternatives for the divisive interaction-based recommender systems? And could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about the chronological plus ID that you touched upon last time you were here? And do you think it is enough to leave it to businesses to change their interaction-based systems, or do you think we should be a bit more prescriptive in this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much also for being concise and precise. So now Dietrich Kloon for the EPP.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be concise as well, I hope, and thank you to Frances for being here again with us last November. When you came, I think it was eye-opening for all of us, really, your insight into what goes on and how particularly young people and minors can be targeted and profiled, and use the example of driven to polarize rather than staying in the middle. If you show an interest in, I don't know, eating habits or diet, that you can end up on polls. So have we done enough now? I mean, I'd like to hear your insights into that. And what will this mean now for young people that we really want to protect with this legislation? I think it's a very important, what we've included in the legislation now, it is important. And do you think that this will do it? And what will be the reaction in Facebook from your knowledge, from your internal knowledge and your experience with that company? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And because both of you were so concise, we have actually a third Catch the Eye. And I think it's also important because Stéphanie Joncotin was also the rapporteur in the Econ Committee. So please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see you here. Glad to see you here, Ms. Haugen. I'm the rapporteur for the Associated Committee, so the Econ Committee, which looks at competition matters. You were quite right when you said that this text has to come to life, has to be translated into reality. I think it's a good text, but I question its efficiency and effectiveness. Dita asked about the governance and the means. You spoke about various issues. I want to talk about sanctions. I think the sanctions could be higher. And the remedies, when it comes to the legal remedies, we've heard that they're not enough. What about destructuring or decommissioning? I know that there's a lot of talk about that on the other side of the pond. Is it technically feasible? I know there are many discussions about that. If you look at Facebook, would it be possible to deconstruct it, to better regulate that giant?
Before I give you the floor, we have, as I announced, a Commission representative. We have Mr. Gérard de Graaf. He's Director of Digital Transformation in CENEC. So in the room or online? Yes, in the room. Welcome. And of course, we are also looking forward to your comment. Also questions, if you have questions to Ms. Haugen.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Honourable members, also very pleased to see Madam Haugen here and thank her for her contributions to the debate. Of course, we are very pleased with the outcome of the DSA and the DMA. Thanks to the Parliament, it's a more ambitious text, it's a better text, and it will therefore have or should have more impact. We hear very clearly also the message from the Parliament about effective implementation. I can assure you that the Commission will do everything to be ready, as we've also said during the negotiations, to take on these important responsibilities of supervising the very large online platforms and the very large online search engines, and as well, of course, in the DMA, the gatekeepers. This is very challenging, but the Commission will do its utmost to be ready on time. On the international aspects, and I think several members mentioned it, of course, DSA and DMA, we expect them to be global reference points. There are other important measures like on AI and the Data Act and cybersecurity that, of course, are going through the legislative process. So there is a lot of attention from third countries in what the EU is doing. In the TTC, we have intensive discussions with the US on tech platforms. I co-chair this working group together with the White House, Peter Harrell and Tim Wu, and I think we have a high degree of convergence, even though, of course, the political situation is what it is in the US. I think the problem analysis is largely shared, and there's a lot of interest, and I would say even sympathy for the way Europe is going forward in this area. One issue we are also convinced about is that we need to work together to project a democratic, human rights, fundamental rights, open internet-based model across the world. We are seeing, of course, very negative developments out there. Less than a month ago, with the support, very close cooperation with the US, we launched a declaration for the future internet, which in the meantime has been signed by more than 60 countries around the world, and there will be others joining very soon. This is effectively projecting the DSA and the DMA vision globally. And I think that is important. It's an important reference for the rest of the world. We are being approached almost on a daily basis by third countries who want to know more about the DSA and the DMA. The questions that we are debating in Europe are being debated all across the world, how to make the internet safe and how to ensure that our fundamental rights can be protected. We have digital partnerships. One has been launched last week with Japan. There is one in the pipeline with South Korea, with Singapore. These issues will be at the core of those digital partnerships. We have a TTC agreed with India. Also, India has expressed its strong interest in discussing the DSA and the DMA. Also, several Latin American countries. So there is a significant interest around the world, and we do expect that the DSA and the DMA will be copied, or parts of it will be copied around the world, as already happened in the past. I mean, Madame Schaldemose was the rapporteur for the platform to business regulation. For example, this has been copied in Japan, has been copied in Korea and in other countries around the world. Maybe one specific, because there was an interest in kind of, I mean, obviously digital diplomacy is really important in this area. And in that context, of course, we are reinforcing also the work of our delegations around the world. I'm here together with a colleague from the EEAS, the European External Action Service. And one of the decisions that has been taken is that the EU will set up an office in San Francisco, exactly to enhance our capacity for outreach, particularly towards the technology platforms, but also on, say, technology trends. This office will work, of course, under the authority of the Washington delegation of the EU and in very close touch with headquarters. Timing will be after the summer. More details will follow, but I think it's another indication that the European Union will want to kind of have its voice heard in places around the world where these issues are really important. So I leave it there. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and honourable members.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's important to have also this insight from the Commission, first of all, about the opening of the office in San Francisco. So far we only had informal reports on that. It's good that you confirm it here officially. But of course also to have your experience on other legislation, how they spilled over already in other countries. I guess that's very interesting. I mean, we also know about the famous Brussels effect, where anyhow our legislation has impact already on, for example, the platforms, I guess, in the US. But now I give you the floor. Finally, you were waiting so patiently, but I think it is important that we let all the groups speak, and you heard the different comments, but also a lot of very concrete questions to you. So please, the floor is yours again.
Such wonderful questions and comments. Thank you. So there's a couple here that I think nicely tie together, but it might not be obvious, which is, you know, one of the opening questions was like, what do we say to the tech companies? You know, like how do we begin this conversation? And I think there is a large opportunity to remind them that I think you guys wrote a law that's going to help them be more long-term successful, right? That a lot of these companies are making short-term trade-offs that have long-term negative impacts for themselves, because they're right now the only thing they're accountable to is profit and loss. It's like, how fast can we grow for the least amount of money? Well, it turns out when you do that, you often burn your future success at the cost of present success. And one of the ways that's so is, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but most industries invest substantially in preparing the next generation to work at their companies. And tech companies do that today. They spend a lot of money on buildings for CS faculties, but because they have this culture of secrecy, right? Like Facebook has done a lot of things where they know they have to keep it secret. They knew that they couldn't release these documents or talk publicly, or when academics would ask for data, they never gave them, because they knew if they acted in a transparent way, they would have to spend more on safety. Right? And after my disclosures, what happened? They spent twice as much as they had been, or at least at Facebook, twice as much as they had been spending more on safety. They should still spend more, but they exactly what they feared happened, right? But one of the things that they're missing out on in terms of their long-term success is that when they act in secrecy, it means they have to train everyone internally. Right now, you can take 0 classes in the kinds of safety interventions that I'm advocating for. You know, there are 0 classes you can take where you get to work with data that is in the shape of the data that is inside of social media companies. So we, as very smart monkeys, are really good at linear patterns, and we're really good at normal distributions. Like if I throw a ball, most of us can estimate, like, where approximately is that ball going to be? And like, where about is it going to land? Right? We're good at thinking that way. On social media, everything follows a power law. A very tiny number of users does most of the posts that get the distribution, a tiny number of posts get the distribution, a tiny number of pages, a tiny number of groups. And the ways of thinking about how to solve those problems, there's all these beautiful, elegant solutions that are possible in terms of doing products that are safe by design. But Facebook has to train every single employee that works on anything like that. They have to train them internally because they've never let any data go externally. And I think something that's going to end up happening when the DSA comes into effect, when we start having external researchers, external civil society groups, when we start building the public muscle of accountability, is these companies are going to start getting employees that actually know about how these systems work before they show up at the door. Imagine if our petroleum industry had students that had never taken a chemistry class. Imagine if our automotive industry had only could hire employees that had never machined something before. This sounds crazy. We would never do that. And so I think there's a new golden age where actually bringing more people to the table will make these companies more successful. They'll get new kinds of solutions. They'll get better talent. There'll be less overhead for them. And right now inside of Facebook, the thing I heard over and over again was, we can't hire anyone. There's no one qualified. Guess what? That error can be over too. Struggling alone doesn't have to be the solution for Facebook. We can all work on building a better future. So the next question is, like, how do we do that? How do we support the researchers? How do we support the regulators with what they need to learn? One of the big areas, I'm working on founding a nonprofit right now. One of the big areas we're working on is we want to have an open source simulated social network, right? Something that's as messy and as broad as what the real data looks like. So we can have students, we can have 14-year-olds who are learning about statistics be able to actually begin getting exposed to data science. Or if you're a postdoc and you're a fellow working with the regulator, you have something where you can go and change lots of different parameters and say, how does the system perform differently when we treat this kind of, change slight different dynamics in the system. We need to be able to train thousands of regulators in the next, 3 or 4 years. We need to start training tens of thousands of students every year. Because if we want people to be able to sit and digest policy proposals or talk about these laws, we need to train them. So working on building out that lab bench, the reason we have environmental science majors is we have a chemistry lab bench. Building out that social network lab bench is going to transform how we teach, how we experiment, how we move forward. I'm so glad you passed legal protections for whistleblowers. I also encourage doing slightly more comprehensive support. So I was supported by a nonprofit called Whistleblower Aid that I didn't need financial support, but many whistleblowers do. Or they'll make sure that that person has physical protection, because some whistleblowers, their lives are actually on the line. So I encourage you to look holistically at those things. Regarding content moderation in the United States, content moderation in the United States is not even on the table because we have something called Section 230, and it's a very, very polarizing and divisive issue. And so I'm really glad that Europe brought to the table and validated this idea that we could talk about systems thinking and transparency, because those are things that I think we can advance the discussion on. But the content and freedom of speech debate in the United States is very, very polarizing. And so I don't think we will not be the leaders in the world in that, unfortunately. Regarding breaking up Facebook, one of the challenges with breaking up Facebook is if we were to look at Instagram in isolation, we see the same problems that we see in Facebook repeated in different parts of the product. So recommender systems that use engagement over and over again have the exact same problems. The reason why they're there is because they're more sticky. They drive more growth. For example, almost every child who uses Facebook today, they're recommended, Instagram, because let's be honest, they don't use Facebook today. Their Instagram accounts, go look at them. For almost all kids, the recommended accounts that they have are from their school, and they're either confidential pages, so someone will put up a Google form where you can post anonymous gossip, like mean things about your classmates, and it'll get blasted out to the whole school. It gets recommended because it's high engagement, or fight clubs. I learned about this from the principal of my high school, where kids will pick anonymous fights to broadcast them out to the school. And right now, when they ask them to take these pages down, Instagram doesn't do anything. And so having rights for children with tech companies really matters because it will change the whole future for those kids. But those problems, the market on its own will not solve them. Breaking up these companies will not solve that. transparency, having regulators get to look at the algorithms to coach them, that can have an impact. If people get to choose between chronological feeds and algorithmic feeds, they will almost always choose algorithmic feeds because they're designed to be sticky. They're designed to be pleasurable. And so just having consumer choice, I don't think will solve that issue. And then the last thing, I think how do we not kill innovation? So the number one thing that allows us to have innovation is more people who are qualified to innovate. I want to close with this idea of we can either solve problems alone or we can solve problems together. If you want to have more cool cars, train more mechanical engineers, right? Train more automotive engineers. If you want cooler social media that does different ways of solving problems, train more people who understand social media. We are entering a new era because of the work you all did, right? We have never been able to see inside behind the curtain. And so we have never been able to teach classes on this before. And 3 years from now, I bet almost every CS department in the world is going to have a class on how these social media systems work. And it's going to be possible because the work that was done in this room and it was done across Europe. And so I think the way innovation is going to move forward is having more people being able to weigh in is going to lead to better discussions. Conferences are going to be so much better. Like right now, the only conference around like recommender systems is very small because there's so few people globally who can sit at that table. I'm excited to see that conference grow and grow because we can now have more and more different kinds of people at the table. So thank you so much. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so grateful for your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for your inspiration, and I think, of course, also for your important feedback that the legislation we had been working on so hard makes a sense, has an impact. I think that these are very important words from your side. I find it very inspiring how you always use real-life examples for describing social media. That leads to the fact that, indeed, we probably have a lack of education on social media, but I think you linked it very well to the legislation. So with more transparency, we basically put into the regulation, we can have also more experts trained and understand what social media is really about. So thank you so much for being here, for answering all of our questions. Thanks to the colleagues for participating in this very interesting and lively debate. If there's not any other business, I have to announce officially the next meetings, and then I close the agenda item for today. So we meet again on the 15th of June and on the 16th of June. Until then, have a good plenary today and tomorrow, and see you back in June.